If you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page to gain access to exclusive videos, take part in Q&As, and watch my retrospectives before they go live on YouTube. The fourth entry in the Matrix series is finally out in cinemas and on HBO Max, costing in a region of $190 million and directed this time by Lana Wachowski, and not with her sister, who also had no involvement with the script. So far it's not performing well at the box office, especially compared to Spider-Man No Way Home, which is doing huge numbers. The early reviews for Resurrections were very mixed, with most leaning on the negative. The common complaint was, why was this film made, with some critics saying there appears to be no creative life left in the series. The Times newspaper gave it 1 star out of 5, calling it another truly horrible sequel. Some haven't been as harsh and warmly welcomed its return and praised its love story. That is the core of this new sequel. The Matrix films are fully ingrained in pop culture thanks to its themes of us being in a fake world controlled by computers and doubting our own existence. Its use of visual effects with the bullet time and extensive fight scenes inspired by Hong Kong cinema have kept them fondly remembered, but in this post-Matrix world one could ask, what else was there to say and add further to this franchise? The trilogy was neatly tied up, with Neo sacrificing himself to save everyone in the real world. So how has Neo returned? This review will contain spoilers, so please come back once you've seen the film if you don't wish to know more about its plot. With this new Matrix film, Thomas Anderson is now a successful video game developer and created the Matrix video games based on dreams from his faint memories of being Neo. Anderson is haunted by these dreams and keeps encountering Tiffany, a married mother who reminds him of Trinity. In an amusing cameo, she's married to Chad Stahelski, Keanu's stunt double from the original trilogy and director of the John Wick films. Anderson has a therapist who helps him with his mental issues, and his therapist prescribes him blue pills to keep his sanity in check. However, Anderson's constant flashbacks encourage him to discontinue his medication. A team in the real world, headed by Bugs, is retracing Trinity's steps from the first film, and discovers Neo's old flat and finds the game running Trinity's old code that discovered Neo within the Matrix before the agents found her. Bugs finds an agent behaving strangely, discovering he is a program embodying Morpheus, and helps free him. Bugs and her crew discover Neo is still alive in the real world, despite his apparent death at the end of the war 60 years earlier. Bugs enters the Matrix to join Morpheus and free Anderson, learning that Smith, who runs the games company, is really Agent Smith, who has been keeping a close eye on Anderson. Bugs and Morpheus convince Thomas Anderson he is living inside the Matrix, and he agrees to be freed in hopes he will once again be with Trinity. I think, like many of us, we never expected to see a fourth entry in the series, and once announced, fans were asking why. The Wachowskis had said no for so long to any follow-up, despite being asked on a yearly basis by Warner Brothers. So here we are with Neo and Trinity back on the big screen. There was oddly not much hype for this film. The trailers seemed delayed and not much had come out on its production. Some rumours suggested Lana Wachowski was going to can the movie when the production was halted due to COVID and had to be persuaded to continue, which isn't a good sign. Once finished, the early reviews weren't looking overly enthusiastic, but then again The Matrix 2 and 3 didn't get the glowing feedback the first film received back in 1999, and the rest of the Wachowski films outside of the Matrix trilogy haven't fared well with the critics and at the box office, despite them producing some very interesting movies over the years. So I went into this film with my expectations low, because the marketing hadn't really done a good job at getting me excited. So does Resurrections live up to the first film, or seem more on par with the sequels? Well, it's nowhere near as good as the first film. That is a tough act to follow, but I do think it has more of an emotional angle to it that made its story more compelling in some aspects to Reloaded and Revolutions. It is, however, the weakest out of the franchise when it comes to action and its scope. It does really feel like a small movie. Despite costing in the region of nearly $200 million, it looks like it cost a lot less. The Matrix and its sequels are fondly remembered for their elaborate action sequences and extensive visual effects that were just jaw-dropping at the time. The sequels really tried to ramp up the action even further. Despite those films not really meeting many people's expectations with its story, there is no denying they delivered on the spectacle. Resurrections fails to match their previous efforts on all levels. The film deploys flashbacks to the original trilogy, and in those quick clips everything looks pretty epic. Then it cuts back to part 4, which honestly looks a bit like a Netflix movie in places, shot with a lot of close-ups, quick edits, and fights taking place in a lot of bland locations that are small in scale. Nothing blew me away. There were some nice visual effects sequences of the real world, and seeing the machines up to their usual tricks of harvesting people for power, but again it's stuff we've seen before. We get to see Keanu use his martial arts skills, but not for long. We get a couple of nice long takes with him using Kung Fu, but for the most part he uses his new force power technique to push people away or use as a shield to avoid any more close combat. Not super exciting to watch, and felt like a cheap alternative to avoid Keanu taking part in long fights. I don't blame him, to be honest, as he's not in his 30s anymore, and not athletic enough to take part in all the extensive wire work. So when it comes to the return of Neo, I felt the idea behind his return was quite interesting, having him be a video game creator, and with him losing his ability to distinguish what is real, is played out effectively, as he tries to make sense of it all to his psychiatrist. At first I did think this new twist seemed to undermine the original, but as this is not real, and only a narrative to keep him operating in the Matrix, it felt like a clever twist to keep it unpredictable, but it was a bit cheesy, as it gives the other fellow coders ideas to play up the noteworthy moments of the Matrix and joke about bullet time, for example. They even play on the Keanu Reeves memes we see scattered around the internet, with him eating by himself. It's all very meta. The tone of the movie is a little more comical. The original trilogy played things very seriously. Humour was rarely used. Some could say they were a bit up themselves and bordering on being pretentious. Number 4 tries to lighten things up, even with its photography, with little use of the green filter the previous films pushed. This makes use of a more colourful image with a comic book style presentation. There are some scenes that do look great, but it still felt like a step back for me. The original trilogy was like an anime turned into live action. This one doesn't have that vibe anymore, so it feels instantly disconnected with its changes in lighting and production design. Of course we have a change of cast for Morpheus and Agent Smith. They make references to the changes of skins and bots etc. using typical video game terms. They are both great actors, but the film was missing Hugo Weaving and Lawrence Fishburne. Sadly, the great composer Don Davis doesn't return, but the new composers who worked on Cloud Atlas do make use of his themes and keep the music in style with the original trilogy, but nothing really stood out to me to make me want to rush out and buy the soundtrack. There was a moment in the film which I quite enjoyed, was seeing Neo fight Agent Smith 2.0, a great adrenaline pumping track that works well, but not much else stood out as memorable. It's not a bad score by any means, but just didn't have the punch of Don Davis's previous work. I didn't walk out this film annoyed or confused by its story, but just with the thought of this didn't really need to be made. It wasn't something people were screaming out for, other than Warner Brothers who saw more money to be made, and the film plays on that idea and makes fun of the studio in the script, which made me chuckle. In some ways it could be compared to Gremlins 2. Joe Dante didn't want to make a sequel but was persuaded by Warner Brothers, who gave him a lot of creative freedom, and the film ends up making fun of the original film and goes a bit meta, very much like Resurrections, which takes it even further. You could even say it feels like Back to the Future Part 2 in places for the first act, and comparisons can be drawn to Wes Craven's New Nightmare. If you enjoyed the Matrix trilogy, I'm sure you will probably give this a go, but if you hated the sequels, then I would suggest avoiding this, as I'm guessing it would annoy you even more. It is a strange viewing experience. To give the Wachowskis credit, the sequels to The Matrix weren't by the numbers and predictable. No one knew what to expect, but probably had an idea where they would go with it, but again they failed to meet what people desired. But what did the fans want? It's hard to know, as sequels can oftentimes never match your own ideas and wants for a follow-up. It's a tough challenge. There is some interesting ideas in this sequel, but not enough to warrant a 2-hour plus runtime. It does have a saggy middle act, and it felt like it was dragging in areas. You never got a sense of any suspense either. The first one and even the sequels had moments with the agents closing in, and there was no escape. Resurrections felt like they were going through the motions. I was just hoping for this film to really do something new with the action genre, and it never gets there. But I don't think that was Lana's goal. It's a love story at heart, and for the most part that angle works. There was a great scene with Keanu and Carrie just sitting there talking about their past. It works a treat and is one of the best moments in the film. In a few years' time, or perhaps in a decade, people will say this movie was doing something really smart and interesting, or it may just be labelled as a sequel that should have never been made and best forgotten. Only time will tell, but for now I'm unsure. Maybe on repeated viewing I will warm to it more and appreciate what Lana Wachowski was trying to do.